As Starmer tries to shake off the Burnham backlash, what really went on behind closed doors? Robert has the inside story.
I put this out, Andy Burnham gets very upset.
It's simply untrue to say that there was a message given that I would definitely be blocked. It doesn't stack up what they are saying.
I then got Downing Street officials saying that on the record they were agreeing with Andy, that he was not warned off in those conversations at the weekend with Downing Street. So I'm just left sort of bemused. I think all sides are being disingenuous.
So with Labour leadership candidates waiting in the wings, how should Starmer have handled it instead?
Just do the charm thing, right?
No,
and he just didn't do it at all. He left it to his flunkies. Always a mistake.
And Robert has an exclusive on King Charles's trip to America.
I am told absolutely categorically the King could not go to America in those circumstances.
Hello and welcome to Talking Politics. I'm Tom Bradby.
And I'm Robert Peston.
Now, if you've been watching the news, listening to the news over the last few days, you will know there was another he said, she said briefing war between Andy Burnham's crew and Downing Street. How did it unfold? Robert, you reported it. Talk us through it. I think we need the behind-the-scenes story of this earth-shattering event.
So I reported a conversation I'd had with somebody, I can't name the individual given the conventions, but somebody who is incredibly close to the Prime Minister and I had every reason to believe was telling me the truth. And this individual said that Burnham had been told in no uncertain terms that if he applied to be a candidate in the Gorton and Denton by-election, he would be blocked for a whole series of reasons. And this individual then went on to say, and therefore you can see that this is, broadly about Burnham trying to make life difficult for the Prime Minister, because if it was just, as he said, wanting to stand for the good of the party, the conversations he would have had would have, persuaded him that, it was going to lead to a car crash if he did put his name forward. So there was, as I say, was a lot of sort of background information apart from the alleged fact that he'd been sort of warned off. And that, I put this out. Andy Burnham gets very upset, says this isn't true, that he had conversations with Downing Street people at the weekend, and nobody had said to him that, his being blocked was a fait accompli, that it had all been determined in advance. And he genuinely got quite emotional about it. I then got a message from a Downing Street official saying that on the record they wanted to say that Burnham was not warned off in those conversations, that, they were agreeing with Andy, that he was not warned off in those conversations at the weekend with Downing Street. So I'm just left sort of bemused. And I mean, if I'm honest with you, I think all sides are being disingenuous. Starmer absolutely did not want him to contest that seat. That was, Starmer's and Morgan McSweeney's settled view for some considerable time. And similarly, Andy Burnham also knew that the chances of him, getting an easy ride to that seat from from a committee full of Starmer loyalists was also close to nil. So the head of the pin that they're dancing on, I guess, is just what actually happened in terms of disingenuous words uttered over the weekend. But everybody knew what was likely to happen long before he put his name forward. And all that's happened, both in the weird, surreal toing and froing we saw yesterday over different statements from different people, most of them directly to me, which is very odd to be in the middle of all of this. It all felt very surreal. Essentially, all we had was confirmation of how difficult that relationship between Burnham and Starmer continues to be. They don't really like each other. I mean, one of the funniest things on the Monday was Starmer standing in a pharmacy next to Wes Streeting, who has at least as acute ambitions to be the next Prime Minister and to replace Starmer as Burnham does. The Prime Minister saying on camera basically how much he loves and admires Andy Burnham, which I just literally couldn't keep a straight face.
The whole thing is just so completely, utterly ridiculous, isn't it? As we've discussed before, like the country wants them to just shut up and get on with it. They just can't do that. It's not Andy Burnham, it's Angela Rayner. If it's not Angela Rayner, it's Wes Streeting. There's no compelling evidence to me that any of them will actually be more popular than Keir Starmer. It is notable very often how bad a communicator Starmer is. Doesn't seem to be able to connect with people at all. Feels like an analog politician in a digital age. We're in a kind of tell it like it is, shoot from the hip kind of political age, and he's a sort of careful lawyer. And the whole thing is painful to watch for sure. But I want to ask you one thing. Forget rights and wrongs. In the cold, hard realities of power, correct decision to block Andy Burnham from standing? I would say it was. Do you agree or not?
So there are two answers. One is the Labour Party's rules do say that a mayor can't just resign to be a candidate. The default position is you do have to get special permission, and the crude version, I don't think it's the driving. I do think the driving motivation is that Starmer does not want his chief rival already in Parliament, and therefore actually, available to mount a leadership challenge. And so the prime motivation of Starmer was to avoid. He just doesn't want, Burnham as the lightning rod for all unhappiness with him actually in Parliament. But the official version is they don't want to risk losing control of the Greater Manchester area, which is, it's because of the devolution of powers. Being mayor of Greater Manchester, it's a really important job. Right, and their view was not only is it very expensive to fight a by-election they don't have to fight. The idea that at a time when they're investing a ton of money in Manchester, so Northern Powerhouse Rail is being initiated. The last thing they want is a reform replacement for Andy Burnham in Manchester to, get the credit for that, be at the helm of all of that.
Both your reasons are true, right?
I'm sure
there's a bit of both.
But there's a but, right? Even if, when you put all that together from Starmer's point of view, it's the right decision to block him, it is by no means certain that whoever they choose, I think the decision is imminent, as the candidate to fight the Gorton and Denton by-election, it's by no means certain that candidate will win that by-election. And, Gorton and Denton, you can see the Manchester skyline from there. There's no question that Burnham would have been a strong candidate in that by-election. If in the end that by-election is won by reform, then Starmer's internal critics will say that Starmer has, made a very serious mistake, because another reform MP, Labour needs like a hole in the head. And this one is quite significant. They are very, very close, and they will get there with more Tory defections, to being within Parliament big enough to displace the SNP in the pecking order of largest parties. And what that would mean is they would get more PMQs questions. So we would see Farage in Parliament putting questions to the Prime Minister more often. They would get more money, and they would get a whip's office, right? So they sort of get
trappings of power.
They get the trappings of power and sort of respectability, which is just helpful for them as they try and persuade the electorate that they're a serious party. So the stakes are not trivial. The other aspect of all of this is it would also be a disaster if Burnham and Starmer continue to be at odds, but it becomes much more visible. I mean, one of the things that's slightly odd is, and I think I would argue that Starmer is more to blame for this than Burnham. They did not talk in the run-up to Burnham making his application to the NEC to stand. I think that's extraordinary, right? I mean, if I had been in Starmer's shoes, I would have just been on the blower to Burnham and I would have schmoozed him. I would have just said, I love you dearly. We'd love to get you in Parliament. This is not the moment. But this is not. But just do the charm thing, right?
No,
and he just didn't do it at all. He left it to his flunkies. Always a mistake, right?
Yeah.
And now, on Monday, they did have a conversation, right? And I am told that they agreed, which I think is significant, to have regular conversations, which is not something they've done. So if they indeed do have regular conversations, and if there can be some kind of an entente, then it will all turn out to be a bit better for Starmer than it looks at the moment. At the moment, it looks... it's what we've got for Starmer is possibly the least worst outcome, but it's still a bad outcome.
Well, we like to be an Inside Track podcast, and you've got some inside track on the King's visit to the US, some juicy inside knowledge.
I have. So I ran into somebody who's quite close to the monarch, and I said, presumably the King will now be going to America for the 250-year celebrations of American independence. And you and I actually have talked about why, if you're Starmer and you want to talk Trump out of some of his more toxic positions, the King is quite a good person to do it because, Trump does seem to listen to King Charles. One of the things this individual said was the King was incandescent about the way that Trump appeared to deride the valor
and
of...
interceded, I heard, and was in communication with the US president and said, please backtrack.
And well, actually, I also know about a conversation between Starmer and Trump about that, which we might maybe come to in a minute.
Yeah.
But the most interesting thing is, so this person said, chances are he will now go on this visit to the US, but there is one reason or one set of eventualities that might mean that he can't go. And I hadn't really been aware enough that the state of Alberta is currently in the process of deciding whether to hold a referendum on independence. And this is all very live. Mm-hmm. And there is a chance that Alberta will hold that referendum. And it is very, very likely that Trump will not be able to resist intervening, right? And so one of the things that is talked about is conceivably, Washington almost offering a bribe to Alberta citizens saying, if you were to vote to join the US, we would pay you X thousands of dollars each. So this is a live event, a live possibility that Alberta will have this vote. Actually, if you look at the opinion polls, they may well vote to remain within Canada, but that's not the point. Right, this would be a big deal for Canada, just simply the referendum happening, and particularly if... Anyway, in those circumstances, I am told absolutely categorically the King could not go to America in those circumstances because he is obviously the King of Canada as well as being our King, and his responsibility would be to the people of Canada. And, if he went to America, it would look somehow as though... almost implicitly, he was endorsing a particular outcome of that referendum. So he will not. I'm told absolutely categorically, if the referendum goes ahead, he will not go to America.
Which, from his point of view, would be the correct decision, right? You can't be King of Canada, and then if Trump intervenes and is it's all getting messy, you can't possibly go. And this is not inside track, but just a sort of fairly obvious assessment. I don't think the King wants to go to America. I shouldn't think he's sitting there thinking, I can't wait to do this. It's impossible to think of two people on this planet with less in common, really, than the King and Trump. And I have absolutely no doubt that he particularly has looked at all the NATO stuff and the Greenland stuff with absolute horror. So, I don't think I can't imagine any world in which he's looking forward to the trip.
Well, it was just one thing that is very much connected. Obviously, one of the things that I've been slightly agonising about is the value of Starmer's relationship with Trump. I mean, he would say that he's putting the national economic and security interest first by being on decent terms with Trump. British people don't like Trump. The opinion polls show that.
No, I was going to bring that up, actually.
And I'm
really don't like him.
And I'm interested the extent to which Starmer trying to basically do what he thinks is in the national interest is actually costing him votes at the moment, because I think quite a lot of people don't like his friendliness with Trump. There was just one story about what happened at the weekend, which I was told by a senior member of the cabinet, that I thought was quite interesting in this context. So apparently on Sunday, I'm told, Trump actually rang Starmer, sort of almost, not exactly out of the blue, but it was his initiative, right? So he rings Starmer. And Starmer then does raise with him how, so many families of killed British servicemen, more than 400 families, feel disrespected, upset by the way that Trump denigrated the British contribution in Afghanistan.
Which was disgusting, by the way. Just those comments to all the people who died, all the people who were maimed, all the people who were psychologically traumatized. I mean, it was disgusting to say those things.
Yeah.
No two ways about it.
It was horrible. So Starmer did then bring it up. And it is quite interesting that I think literally an hour or two later, Trump did post on his Truth Social page. He didn't exactly apologise, because he never apologises, but he did backtrack. He did say that British soldiers have been very brave, and he was grateful. But
I think I heard various things. I certainly heard that the King got in touch. I heard that there was an enormous backlash within the military, including the US military, and that was communicated to Trump, like extreme unhappiness at the highest levels at these comments. And, Trump, you can say many things about him, but he maintains, notable in his many backtracks over the last 10 days, a degree of political instinct. And he clearly saw, as he has in Minneapolis, that this is going the wrong way for him and is getting particularly troublesome. And I've had a lot of conversations, I guess partly my obsession over the last couple of weeks has been talking to kind of military and intelligence people about our interdependence with the US, which we talked about on last week's podcast, and how and when and in what terms we could begin to be self-sufficient, as it were. And everyone has said it's just impossible. It will never happen. We're so dependent on the Americans. It would take 20 years, and we don't have the national will, which is what you've said, to do it, because it would be enormously expensive. It would require a degree of focus, a degree of dedication, a vast amount of money. And someone was mentioning that.
So I don't think I have said we don't have the national will, but it requires leadership, right? I mean, we're talking about a ramping up of spending that would lead to very significant cuts elsewhere. For what it's worth, I think we do have to reduce our dependence on America as a matter of urgency, and I hope that this is a government that can, basically get its act together and start to move in that direction rather than forcefully.
Yeah, I guess all the point I'm making is that everyone I speak to says, yeah, that's all fine, but it's going to take decades, and it will require a degree of political will that is just not on display at the moment. And a lot of people have mentioned kind of Israel, which is one of those countries that a long time ago did decide to develop a degree of operational independence. And the point that various people made to me is that you have to be dedicated to that for decades in order to achieve it, because it's actually very, very hard. Yeah. But just finally, let's talk about reform, because I think you were looking at the same sort of below the line polling data and focus group feedback that I was. Boy, British people, they really don't like Trump. They really didn't like the Greenland staff. I saw a poll today on Fox News that said that a lot of people, think Trump's, a genuine threat to world peace. You see something on X and you think, as this AI, I mean, you never know whether it's real or fake. But regardless of whether that poll is correct or not, the point I think is that certainly in the definitely correct UK polling data, British people are freaked out by Trump. They really are scared, don't like it, don't like the Greenland stuff, don't like the undermining of the alliance stuff, detest the NATO stuff. It's really not good. And Reform, on one level, have had a good couple of weeks. Jenrick defects, Suella Braverman defects, quite big names. We can debate whether having all the Tories that we threw out, or some of the most visible Tories that we threw out, is a good thing or a bad thing. When I take a step back and look at the kind of political battlefield in this country, I still think, sure, Reform look to be in a good position. They're quite a chunk, not that far, but they're a decent margin ahead in the polls. But more and more, I look at the Labour side and you think all Labour, the Green vote could easily get squeezed, the Lib Dem vote could easily get squeezed. All Labour have really got to do is get their act together, be a bit better led, be a bit more focused, and try to drag the centre and the left back together. The right, meanwhile, seems really kind of split down the middle in a way that's very difficult for both sides. I think Kemi Badenoch's doing better. I think you agree. They're untainted to a degree by what happened before compared now to all the people joining Reform. So you think, okay, maybe they will recover. And Reform haven't been in government, have all these Tory big beasts of the past, and have the Trump thing hanging around their neck. And if Labour really go for Farage as the mini Trump, that's going to be very, very difficult for him to segue out of. So I don't think it's that good for Reform. I think they've got a long way to go. And I don't think it's that bad for Labour. But what's your conclusion as a result of what we've seen in terms of these defections and so on? What's your assessment of the political battlefield?
When I wake up in the morning, when my cortisol levels aren't soaring because of something that Trump has done, I'm just reminded every single day of how extraordinary our politics are at the moment. To have Labour, Tories, Lib Dems and Greens all within 1 or 2 percentage points of each other, all sub 20%, and Reform on 26, 27%. This is so profound, right?
Well, it may be profound.
No, but it's in and of it. It may pass, but in and of itself, it is. Look, we have not lived through anything like this.
That's true,
right? It is. We saw the rise of the SDP. It was one party, right? This is different. Right? And I just think we've all got to be slightly humble and say we don't really know what's going on, truthfully, other than the tribal loyalties have gone.
People are hacked off.
People are very unhappy. I've always clung to this idea, but basically the electorate time and again tests me on this, but I have always clung to the idea that any government that can raise the living standards of a significant number of people is very likely to be re-elected, right? And similarly, any opposition party that can demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that they can do that is going to do well, right? Now, on that basis, that is either good or bad for Labour, right? If I'm right, it's good in the sense that it ought to totally focus their minds on what they ought to be doing. It's bad in the sense that, as far as I'm concerned, they're still totally clueless about how to achieve it. And frankly, freezing rail fares for a bit and take a little bit off your energy bills ain't going to do it. It doesn't even scratch the surface of what needs to be done. And so, to go back to your original point, which is it's not looking so bad for Labour, you're sort of right, but They actually just need an economic plan that just ain't there at the moment.
It's The Economy, Stupid. As always, we better stop there. But thanks for joining us. For now, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.